The air in the bank, a sterile mix of bleached paper and metallic currency, felt thin and hard to breathe. For 17 years, the 15th of every month was a day of quiet ritual, a transfer, a small step toward my son Leo's future. Today, the ritual broke. The teller, a young woman with a kind face and nervous eyes, kept typing, her brow furrowed. A frown line appeared between her brows. She cleared her throat. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jensen," she murmured, her voice a fragile thing in the cavernous silence of the bank. "I can't make the transfer. There seems to be a balance of 0, sir." A cold dread, sharp and horribly familiar, seized me. It wasn't a shock. It was a confirmation. I had felt this coming for years, a low hum of instability beneath the floorboards of our marriage. But I was no longer the man who hoped for the best. I was the man who had meticulously planned for the worst. The teller slid a printout across the cool marble counter. My eyes scanned the columns of figures until they landed on the last entry. A single, massive withdrawal, dated 3 weeks ago. The blood drained from my face, a cold, rushing tide. The recipient was listed in stark corporate font. Damien's Gastronomy, Inc. My stepson. I was sitting in my car, the engine's quiet hum a stark contrast to the roaring in my ears, when my phone buzzed. It was an Instagram notification. I tapped it open. There was Damien, my arrogant, perpetually failing stepson, grinning like a lottery winner, a set of keys dangling from his fingers. "The dream is real!" his caption screamed in self-congratulation. "Secured the perfect spot for Ember and Ash. Thanks to my #1 supporter, my amazing mom." Behind him stood the old heritage building on the waterfront, a place notorious among local developers as a money pit of asbestos and crumbling foundations. My wife, Elena, hadn't just stolen from our son's future. She had set it on fire to warm her own son's ego. My phone rang again, shattering the silence. Her name glowed on the screen. I answered. "Honey, are you on your way home?" Elena's voice was a confection of sweetness and light. "Damien has the most wonderful news to share with us tonight." The charade was about to begin. I walked through the front door and was immediately hit by the scent of her expensive perfume, a floral wave trying desperately to mask the stench of her betrayal. She and Damien were already at the dining table, champagne flutes in hand, their faces bright with manufactured joy. Leo was there too, my son, his face open and happy, completely oblivious. He smiled when he saw me. That smile was the only thing in the room that was real. Elena's eyes searched mine, looking for the storm she knew she deserved. I gave her nothing. I gave her a placid ocean. I smiled, my face feeling like a mask. "That's fantastic news," I said, my voice even. I congratulated Damien. I suggested we open a special bottle of wine I'd been saving. They saw a husband and stepfather playing his part. They didn't see the cold, precise gears of a long, dormant plan clicking into motion behind my eyes. They thought they had won. As I retrieved the wine from the rack, my fingers brushing over the cool, dark glass, I glanced at a framed photo on the credenza. It was of a younger us, taken on our honeymoon, our smiles genuine. When had her loyalty fractured so completely? A more important question followed. How could she possibly believe I wouldn't be ready for it this time? The clinking of cutlery against porcelain filled the dining room. Over a rack of lamb, Elena confessed, her words carefully chosen to paint her crime as a noble sacrifice. "It's just an investment in the family, Alex," she said, placing her manicured hand on my arm. Her touch felt alien. "When the restaurant is a success, we'll pay Leo's fund back, double, I promise." Damien nodded eagerly, his mouth full. He was already spinning tales of Michelin stars and celebrity patrons, a fantasy built on the foundation of his stepbrother's stolen education fund. They needed me. Not my forgiveness, but my complicity. They needed me to sign off on their version of reality. I focused on the deep crimson liquid swirling in my wine glass. I let the silence hang for a moment, making them wait. Then, I looked up and nodded slowly. "You're right," I said, the words tasting like ash. "It's a wonderful opportunity for Damien." I saw their shoulders visibly relax. The tension Elena had carried into the room dissolved. They believed I had caved. They believed I was the same man she had been taking advantage of for years. Weak, forgiving, predictable. After dinner, she slid a document across the polished wood of the table, a form from the bank retroactively authorizing the withdrawal of the funds, a way to tidy up her theft. "Just a formality, honey," she cooed, "for the bank's records." Her pen lay beside the paper. All I had to do was sign it, legitimize her crime, and become an official partner in their deceit. Did I refuse and show my hand this early? Or did I sign and let them think they had me completely under their control? I picked up the pen. The next morning I called in sick to the accounting firm where Elena believed I was a mid-level drone. Instead of driving to my cubicle, I drove downtown to a sleek tower of smoked glass and steel that scraped the sky. The office of my old college roommate, Ben, smelled of rich leather and quiet power. He was the only person on earth who knew my secret. "She did it," I said, sinking into one of his plush chairs. "Emptied the whole fund." Ben nodded slowly, his expression grim but unsurprised. "So, we activate the protocol?" "We activate the protocol," I confirmed. "We didn't touch my 401k. That was the emergency backup. This was the offensive line." Following my instructions, Ben's fingers flew across his keyboard. He initiated the liquidation of a small, insignificant fraction of my hidden portfolio. A portfolio seeded 15 years ago with a single, lucky tech investment, a secret I had kept from Elena as a test of her character. A test she had now spectacularly failed. Within the hour, the funds were transferred. We created an irrevocable trust in Leo's name, a fortress of finance so impenetrable that not even the highest-paid lawyer could breach its walls. We seeded it with enough capital to cover tuition, board, and expenses at any university in the world, with enough left over to fund a master's degree and a down payment on a house. Leo's future, the one his mother had gambled away, was now safer than it had ever been. Ben leaned back, satisfied. "That handles Leo, protects him completely." He paused, a glint in his eye. "What about them?" A thin, cold smile touched my lips. "That's phase 2. I pulled out my phone and showed him the pictures Damien had posted of his new restaurant location. "Ben," I asked, "do you still have that contact at the city's Department of Buildings? The one who loves finding problems?" The coffee shop was buzzing, the air thick with the bitter, rich aroma of a dark roast. I held a cheap burner phone to my ear, its plastic shell cool against my skin. "Department of Buildings? Inspector's office?" A gruff voice answered. I pitched my own voice lower, adding a gravelly note of civic concern. "I was a worried citizen," I explained. I had heard that the old heritage building on the waterfront was being renovated for a restaurant. I was concerned about safety. I became specific. I mentioned the high probability of asbestos in the pre-war insulation. I talked about the original knob and tube wiring being a fire hazard. I questioned its compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, knowing its narrow doorways and lack of ramps. I wasn't guessing. I had spent the previous night buried in city archives and historical building records. I was simply telling the inspector where to point his flashlight. The official on the other end was silent for a moment. Then he said, "This is very detailed, sir. Most tips aren't this specific." I'm in construction, I lied smoothly. I notice these things. Well, I appreciate you bringing it to our attention, he said, a new energy in his voice. We'll dispatch a senior inspector to take a look tomorrow morning. Can I get your name for the report? 2 days later, the first explosion of panic detonated in our house. Damien called Elena, his voice a high-pitched squeal of disbelief and terror. Mom, you won't believe this. The city is shutting us down. A senior inspector, a man known for his merciless adherence to the code, had slapped Damien's project with a full stop work order. The official report was a work of art. It detailed a mountain of mandatory, non-negotiable, and ruinously expensive upgrades. A complete rewiring of the entire building, professional asbestos abatement, a new commercial-grade HVAC system, the installation of a service elevator. The costs would run into the hundreds of thousands. The grand opening was postponed, indefinitely. The dream was already a nightmare. That night, Elena came to me. Her face was pale under her makeup, her hands trembling. All the performative confidence she'd displayed at the dinner table was gone, stripped away to reveal the raw, grasping fear beneath. Alex, she pleaded, her voice a strained whisper. We have a problem, a big one. I waited. We need more money, she said, the words tumbling out. We need you to co-sign a business loan. It's the only way to save the restaurant, to save Damien. She looked at me, her eyes begging. She had no idea she was pleading with the very architect of her disaster. I sat at our kitchen island, my fingers resting on the cold, unforgiving granite. It felt like the ice that had formed in my veins. I looked at Elena, at her desperate, pleading face, and I delivered the two softest, most destructive words I could. No, I won't. I told her Damien had gotten himself into this mess. He could get himself out. Her fear instantly curdled into a hot, spitting rage. I thought you were family, she screamed, her voice echoing in the kitchen. After everything I've done for you, for this family. I remained silent. I let her accusations hang in the air, a toxic fog. I had to appear unreasonable, petty, and unsupportive. Her anger was a necessary part of the equation. It would force her to make her next, more desperate, and far more foolish move. She stormed out of the house, the front door slamming behind her. I knew exactly where she was going. She was headed toward the one major asset she believed she still controlled half of. Our home. The question wasn't if she would use it to bail out her son. The only question was how illegally she would do it. A week passed in a state of frigid, armed silence. To her, it seemed I was going to my accounting job every day, defeated. In reality, I was spending my days in a small, anonymous office space I'd rented, monitoring our finances with the precision of a hawk. Then, just as I'd anticipated, a flag appeared. A new lien against our property. A second mortgage. I pulled the digital paperwork from the county clerk's website. It was all there. Her forgery of my signature was clumsy, almost insulting in its lack of effort. She had found a predatory lending firm, a bottom feeder happy to ignore the red flags in exchange for a punishingly high interest rate. She had taken the equity I had spent 2 decades of my life building, and she had tossed it, like a bundle of cash, into the roaring furnace of Damien's collapsing restaurant. The stale, recycled air in my temporary office suddenly felt heavy, thick with the smell of my decaying marriage. I stared at the lender's name on the document. Apex Financial Solutions. They were a small, ruthless firm known for their aggressive, swift foreclosures. They were a shark, and Elena had just chummed the water with our home. She thought she was throwing them a lifeline. She didn't realize she was the bait. But what happens, I thought, when a much bigger, much quieter shark enters the water. I picked up the phone and dialed Ben. "It's time," I said, my voice low and steady. "I want to buy the debt." Through one of my shell corporations, a blandly named entity called Orion Holdings, we made an offer to Apex Financial. We didn't just ask for Elena's loan. We offered to buy her entire high-risk mortgage portfolio, packaging her toxic debt with a dozen others. To a firm like Apex, it was the perfect deal. A quick, clean profit, offloading a bundle of risky assets all at once. It cleared their books and gave them an immediate cash infusion. They had no idea that their multi-million-dollar deal was a Trojan horse, designed solely to capture one small, forged loan on a suburban house. The transaction, lubricated by a price that was slightly above market value, was completed in 48 hours. It was clean, untraceable, and utterly anonymous. I was now, officially, Elena's lender. I owned her leash. From my rented office window, the neon glare of the city seemed to sharpen, illuminating the next step on the path I had laid out. The papers were finalized. My shell corporation was now the entity to which my wife owed a massive, high-interest debt, a debt secured by the very home she thought she was using to defy me. Now all I had to do was wait for her to default. Flush with the new cash from the predatory loan, Damien rushed his renovations. He cut every corner imaginable, hiring cheap, undocumented labor and ordering construction materials that were cosmetic lookalikes of code-compliant ones. He announced a soft opening, an exclusive event for potential investors and local social media influencers. This was my opening. Through a discreet third-party agency, I hired a food blogger known only as the Culinarian. He was a purist, a man whose brutal honesty had shuttered more than one promising restaurant. His anonymity was his power. The night before the soft opening, I sent him an anonymous email from a secure address. The subject line was simple: "What to look for at Ember and Ash." The email was my tip sheet. It was a detailed, specific guide to every corner Damien had cut. I told him to ask if the scallops were diver-caught or frozen, to inquire about the origin of the Kobe beef sliders. I told him to check the wine list for cheap mass-market wines being passed off at premium prices. I told him the pastry chef had quit 2 weeks ago over a pay dispute. I gave him everything. The blogger's reply came within an hour. It was short and chilling. "If even half of this is true," he wrote, "it's not just a bad review, it's a public execution." He confirmed his reservation for Saturday night. The trap was set. The review dropped on a Monday morning. It wasn't a review, it was a vivisection. The Culinarian had crafted a masterpiece of culinary destruction. He branded Ember and Ash a Potemkin restaurant, a beautiful, expensive facade hiding a cheap, rotten core. He described the scallops as rubbery erasers swimming in lukewarm butter. The steak was an insult to the cow it came from. He called the wine list a collection of gas station sorrows sold at Parisian prices. The review was witty, vicious, and utterly devastating. It went viral. By lunchtime, Ember and Ash was trending on Twitter for all the wrong reasons. The city's main newspaper had linked to the blog post. Damien's phone began ringing, not with praise, but with the sound of every single investor and reservation canceling. He was a laughingstock before he had even officially opened. That evening, Elena confronted me in the living room. Her face was contorted with rage, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. The scathing review glowed on its screen. "This is your fault!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You did this! You've been sabotaging us from the beginning! You hate my son!" Her accusation hung in the air, truer and more precise than she could ever possibly imagine. The confrontation was the ugliest yet. The house felt cold, stripped of all its former warmth, the air crackling with her fury. Pushed to the brink, Elena finally admitted the full, devastating scope of her financial crusade. It wasn't just the college fund. It wasn't just the fraudulent second mortgage. She had drained our joint savings accounts, the emergency fund I had so carefully built, the stock portfolio I had managed for our retirement. Everything, every last dime was gone, shoveled into the insatiable furnace of Damien's ego. "I had to," she cried, her voice raw with a self-pity that masqueraded as desperation. "You gave me no choice. You were never a real father to him. You never loved him like your own." And there, in the doorway, stood Damien. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't remorseful. He was smirking. A small, smug, triumphant curl of his lip. He saw this not as his mother's profound betrayal, but as my personal failure. In that instant, seeing his face and hearing her twisted justification, something inside me didn't break. It hardened. It calcified into something cold, clear, and unbreakable as diamond. This was the end of the game. I didn't shout, I didn't argue, I didn't say a word. I simply looked at them, at the two people who had formed an alliance against my son and me. I let a long, chilling silence stretch between us, a silence that spoke more than rage ever could. Then I turned and walked upstairs. "Alex, don't you walk away from me!" Elena screamed from the bottom of the stairs, her voice a mix of fury and a new, creeping fear. But I was already gone. For the next 3 days, I was a ghost in my own home. I slept in the guest room, the door locked. I left for my job before the sun was up and returned long after they had gone to bed. When Elena sent a barrage of furious, pleading texts, I responded with single, sterile words. "Okay. Fine. Yes." They mistook my silence for surrender. I heard them whispering in the kitchen late at night, their voices low and conspiratorial. They were planning their next move, convinced I was a broken man, a man they now had to manage. They felt powerful, in complete control of the emotional landscape of the house. The tension in the air was thick and heavy, like the humid stillness before a lightning strike. A note appeared on my pillow on the third night, penned in her elegant, flowing script. "We need to talk," it read. "We need to sell the house and downsize. It's the only way forward for us." She still thought there was an us. She still believed she had a say in our future. She had no idea that I already owned it. It was time. Seated across from Ben in his quiet, sunlit office, I gave the order to execute the final moves. First, I instructed the lawyers for Orion Holdings to send an official notice of default to Elena. The payment on the second mortgage was now 30 days late. Per the terms of the predatory loan she had signed, the full accelerated amount was now due immediately. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 30 days. The letter was sent via courier to her personal lawyer. Second, I signed the divorce papers Ben's team had prepared. They were simple, direct, and cited financial malfeasance as the cause for dissolution. I requested that the papers be served to Elena personally at 7 p.m. the next evening, at Ember and Ash, in the middle of whatever was left of its dinner service, publicly. Finally, I sat down at Ben's conference table, my own laptop open before me. The glow from the screen cast long shadows on my face. I opened the IRS whistleblower portal. I filled out the form slowly and deliberately. I reported a massive, undeclared cash gift from one Elena Jensen to a Damien Volkov. I then flagged Damien's company for probable payroll tax evasion, citing my insider knowledge as a concerned accountant. I detailed the cash payments to his staff and the fraudulent loan used as startup capital. I hovered the cursor over the Submit button. This was the final seal, the point of no return. Ben looked at me, his expression grave. "Are you sure, Alex?" he asked, his voice quiet. "This will burn everything to the ground. There will be nothing left to salvage." I looked out the window at the sprawling city below. "I know," I said, and I pressed the button. Some foundations have to be built on ashes. My plan unfolded with the brutal, impersonal efficiency of a controlled demolition. The divorce papers were served as requested. A stoic legal aide walked into the near-empty dining room of ember and ash and handed the sealed envelope to Elena in front of her son and the 3 remaining staff members. The humiliation was public, acute, and absolute. The next day, the registered letter announcing the foreclosure arrived. 2 days after that, a thick, terrifying envelope bearing the seal of the Internal Revenue Service was delivered to Damien. A full, comprehensive audit of him and his business had been initiated. Their world, a flimsy structure built on my money and their lies, imploded. They were cornered, financially ruined, and terrified. So they did the only thing they could think of. They came for me. They bypassed security and stormed the floor of the accounting firm where I had worked for 15 years, where they believed I was just another anonymous cog in a vast corporate machine. My receptionist's voice crackled over my desk intercom. "Alex, your wife and a young man are here to see you. They don't have an appointment, but they seem insistent." I took a slow, deep breath. The air in the office suddenly felt electric. "Send them in," I said. They burst into my small, gray-walled cubicle like a storm surge. Elena's face was a blotchy mask of rage and desperation. Damien looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting around as if seeking an escape route. They were so consumed by their own panic that they didn't notice the utter bareness of my space. No family photos, no personal knickknacks, nothing to suggest a life lived here. "You have to call this off," Elena hissed, slamming her palm down on my desk. The flimsy partition shuddered. "The foreclosure, the divorce, all of it. This is insane. You're destroying our family." "You've ruined me," Damien chimed in, his voice shaking with a pathetic blend of anger and fear. "My restaurant, my future, everything. You have to fix this." They still saw me as the man they could bully, the passive, gentle man they could manipulate into submission. In their minds, they were still the victims. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at them. I simply swiveled in my chair, turned to my printer, and pressed the print button. The machine whirred to life, its quiet, mechanical sound marking the official end of their reality. I took the single sheet of paper from the tray and handed it to Elena. It wasn't a legal document. It was a summary statement for a private equity fund. The name on the account wasn't Alex Jensen. It was Alexei Volkov, my birth name, a name she had never known, a part of a past I had never shared with her. Her eyes scanned the page, then fixated on the number at the bottom, listed in crisp black digits. $47,831,294. She stared at it, her mouth slightly agape. She didn't understand. What is this?" she stammered. "That," I said calmly, my voice steady and clear, "is why I don't need my 401k. I then handed her a second sheet of paper. It was the Articles of Incorporation for Orion Holdings, the company that now owned the debt on our house. My name, Alexei Volkov, was listed as the sole director. "I own your debt, Elena," I said, letting the words land with their full, devastating weight. "I own the house. The foreclosure is proceeding on my direct order." The color drained from her face. I watched as her mind frantically tried to connect the dots, to process the impossible truth. The entire power dynamic of our 2-decade relationship didn't just shift. It inverted. It collapsed. It was annihilated in a single, silent, world-shattering moment. She looked up from the papers, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror. It was a terror that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the fact that she was staring at a complete stranger. The man she thought she had controlled for 20 years did not exist. Who? Who are you? She whispered. The air in my tiny, borrowed cubicle grew thick, heavy with their shattered reality. Damien, the arrogant boy king, collapsed into the flimsy visitor's chair. His bravado evaporated, leaving behind the vacant, hollowed-out stare of a man who suddenly sees a sheer cliff edge where he thought solid ground had been. Elena just stood there, the papers trembling in her hand. The revelation of the money was a shock, but the revelation of the intricate, long-game plan was the true killer blow. She was finally, truly understanding. Her betrayals, the college fund, the second mortgage, the savings, were not a series of victories. They were simply the triggered steps in a trap I had laid for her years ago. She was seeing me for the first time. Not as Alex Jensen, the placid accountant, the provider to be milked, but as Alexei Volkov, a predator who had been patiently watching her, waiting for her to reveal her true nature. I stood up from my desk and put on my jacket. It felt like shedding a costume. "My work here is done," I said, not to them, but to the space itself. My time playing this part was officially over. As I moved to walk past them, to leave them in the wreckage, Elena's hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Her touch wasn't furious anymore. It was desperate. "Alex, wait," she begged, and for the first time in a decade, I heard something in her voice that sounded like genuine, unscripted remorse. Tears, real ones this time, streamed down her face, carving paths through her expensive makeup. "I'm sorry," she choked out, the words catching in her throat. "Oh God, Alex, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I lost sight of everything. Of you, of Leo, of us. Please, don't do this. We can fix this. I can fix it." Damien, seeing his mother's desperate plea, stumbled to his feet. "She's right," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. "I'm sorry. I never should have. I was wrong." His apology was pathetic and hollow, the words of a child who was sorry he got caught. Their apologies hung in the air, a final, desperate gambit. They were offering me the one thing they thought I might still want, their repentance, their family, their return to the way things were. The low hum of the office building's ventilation system seemed to fall silent, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for my answer. I stopped. I turned and faced them fully. I looked at Elena, the woman who chose her entitled son over our own. I looked at Damien, the smirking man-child who had enabled it all. I felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, no satisfaction. Just a profound, quiet emptiness where my love for her used to be. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to marinate in the uncomfortable, terrifying space they had created. They had built their entire world on the assumption of my weakness. Now they had to face my strength. Then I gave them my answer. It was not loud. It was not angry or triumphant. It was a single, simple, two-letter word that was the final nail in the coffin of their lives. No. What would they do now? Their last hope, their final gambit, had been extinguished with a single, quiet word. I gently, deliberately removed her hand from my arm. Her skin was cold. "The foreclosure is final," I stated, my voice devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a man closing a file. "The divorce is proceeding. The IRS is your problem now, not mine." I paused, letting them absorb the finality of it. "This isn't a punishment," I said. "This is a consequence, the direct and unavoidable result of the choices you both made." I didn't look back as I walked out of the cubicle. I walked down the long hallway, past the rows of identical desks, my footsteps echoing softly on the tile. I walked out of the building and into the bright, clean air of the afternoon. As the automatic glass doors slid shut behind me, I felt the weight of 2 decades lift from my shoulders. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't feel victorious. I felt liberated. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Leo. "Hey Dad, just got my final grades, straight A's. MIT is looking good." A new life was waiting. 6 months later. The scene is not one of anger or conflict, but of deep, resonant peace. I am standing with Leo on the expansive balcony of our new home, a penthouse that overlooks the entire glittering sprawl of the city. The sun is setting over the distant ocean, painting the sky in breathtaking strokes of orange, pink, and deep purple. The breeze is cool, carrying the distant, humming energy of the metropolis below. We clink glasses. Sparkling cider for him, a vintage 12-year-old single malt scotch for me. The satisfying, heavy clink of crystal against crystal is a sound of celebration, of a future that was once stolen now being gloriously, beautifully secure. We talk about his upcoming trip to Boston for his orientation week at MIT. His excitement is a palpable, infectious energy that fills the evening air. He talks about robotics, about the labs he's going to work in, about the future he is building for himself. The feeling of the heavy, cool crystal tumbler in my hand, the crisp sea breeze on my face, and the muted sounds of traffic so far below us create a peaceful, perfect urban symphony. "Have you heard from her?" Leo asks. The question is gentle, devoid of any accusation or bitterness. He is a good kid, the best. I shake my head, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "Only through the lawyers," I reply. The house was sold at auction. Elena, after the divorce was finalized, moved back to her small hometown to live with her sister. Damien's restaurant was liquidated to pay off a fraction of his tax bill. I'd heard through Ben that he was now working as a line cook in a chain diner off the interstate. They are no longer characters in my story. They are footnotes in a chapter I have finally, definitively closed. There is no satisfaction in knowing the details of their downfall. Only a quiet confirmation that the scales of the universe have been balanced. The faint scent of salt water from the harbor drifts up, a subtle reminder of the waterfront building where the final act of betrayal began. Now, it's just a distant, powerless memory. Leo, sensing my thoughts have drifted, claps me on the shoulder. "I'm going to go finish packing," he says with a grin. "Can't be late for my new life." He heads inside, leaving me alone with the twilight. I lean on the smooth, cool metal of the railing, looking out not just at the city, but at the vast, dark expanse of the ocean beyond it. The first stars are beginning to appear in the deepening indigo of the sky. For so many years, I lived a half-life. I was Alex Jensen, the predictable accountant, a man hiding his strength, waiting for a betrayal I knew, on some deep, intuitive level, was inevitable. Now that wait is gone. My revenge was never truly about destruction. It was about protection and, ultimately, about liberation. I protected my son from the consequences of his mother's choices, and in doing so, I finally liberated myself. The quiet hum of the city, the vastness of the sea, the promise of a new day dawning beyond the horizon, it all coalesces into a single, profound feeling: peace. I have given my son everything, and in the process, I have reclaimed myself. The future is a blank page, and for the first time in a very long time, I am the one holding the pen.